input to the activation function, which is sigmoid here, right? So what sigmoid does is it actually transforms the input. So for example, if I'm starting with the the input node, and I have to go to the your hidden node. So I'll transform it in the way I'll take the x, which is the vector of the inputs, I'll multiply it with the weights of these your basically the connections, and then I'll add the bias upon it, and then I'll transform it with a sigmoid function, so that it comes into a particular range. So common activation functions are tanh or sigmoid or softmax is generally used at the output here, and one of the main reason to do that is to bring it in a range so that they don't overshoot or they don't diminish a lot. So in this case, for all the your input samples, you will get an A1, and it is done in a single step only. Similarly, you will get your Z2, which is quite similar to how we calculated Z1. And then finally, you use a softmax function to find out your predicted value of the target. Now, the softmax function is again something which is quite interesting and which is pretty much related to your like how you calculate the probability. So what softmax does is if you have three outputs, or in this case since we have three classes, so it will return basically three values for each and every sample, which will have the probability of that particular class, and then we'll just take out the class with the highest probability.
It's basically log-based probability, not.
It's a log. Basically, it's a log likelihood to be precise, and so okay. So I mean, I don't intend to actually go a lot into the mathematical details right now, because for that purpose, I really hope that you'll go through all the papers or the resources that are attached here. Main purpose is to just get a bit familiar with how we are using Python for this purpose, right? So and finally we calculate the loss, which is okay. So as I told you, in the forward progression, there was no role of the real output value, right? But and what exactly does loss does? It actually finds out how much error was there in the output that was predicted and the output which was actually there. So it will take again a very common function which is used called categorical cross entropy, which is again a log-based result, which tells that this was the difference between the value which was predicted and the value which was there. So, and finally I take the mean of it, because there were three value in the output and input, so I just take the mean of all that, so I get a single value for the loss. And finally the prediction is the index with the largest value.
You should take the max, not the mean.
Sorry?
You should take the max over there.
No, the reason the mean is taken is, you have three classes. For one class, it predicted some 0.2.
Mean will always be half, because they sum up to 1.
Mean will be the total. So, okay, I'll say. For example, the real class was something like 100. Okay, the 0th class was the real class. So, I mean, it is represented as 100. Your predicted output was 0.5, 0.2, and 0.3, right?
They sum up to 1, so when you take a mean, it will always be 0.5.
Right. I mean, that's true, but if you consider it in this way, if you minus 1 by 0.5, right? This is what you'll do, right? In the cross entropy, you actually are taking the log of the difference between the real value and the predicted value, and then you are basically minusing, subtracting each indices to the corresponding index, and then you are taking the mean of it. Because although the result had to be 100, but for some reasons it also said that the probability of the probability of the class at the first position was 0.2, which should not happen, right? So you should also take that into consideration. That what are the reasons that it is saying the probability of your second class was 0.2? So that when it go through that particular sample again, it will say that last time I got a probability of 0.2 for the second class, but it was not correct. So maybe I'll say that this time it is just 0.1, and then with multiple epochs it will, you know, diminish to 0.00 something.
It will not take it as a sum, because sum of all losses. So if you take a mean, it might come down to a small value, even if they're extreme.
Actually, we can take the sum. It's actually the same thing in a way, and we are just taking a mean to, you know, consider it as a single value, right? Sum or mean, anything will do. Okay, then your Theano functions that you just saw. So given x, just go back here. Given x, we can go through this graph. From x, we calculate z1, we calculate a1, we calculate z2, and then finally we calculate y hat, which is the value of your forward propagation. So yeah. So in the forward propagation is basically a Theano function which will return you the value of the y hat. Similarly, you can get the value of loss using the Theano function given x and y, because your loss will also require the value of the y, which you will input when you actually want to train the model. And finally, there's something called predict, which will just return you this the class with the highest probability. Right? And finally comes your gradient, which is basically how your loss is changing according to the parameters or the weights, right? So we have 4 parameters here, which is W1, W2, B1, B2, and we have the loss that we calculated. Loss is basically similar to, that particular diagram where, that particular diagram about the backpropagation. So in that case, the output was E. So you can actually consider loss as E, and W1, W2, and B2 and D1 as, you know, the intermediate or hidden layers. And when the error is propagated from this W1, W2 to the loss, and finally you get the real value, you will backpropagate it and find out that how much do I have to change these weights in order to get a better result next time. And the way you change the weights is using gradient descent, and what it does is it basically updates your weight in accordance to the loss that you get. So in this case, it actually modifies your existing weights with some value. So existing weight was W2, and it modifies it to W2 minus alpha, which is your learning rate, multiplied by your gradient. Does anyone get, why it is working like this?
Moving in the direction of maximum.
Gradient descent.
Yes. So a gradient actually tells you the direction in which you should change the weights, and then it actually changes the weights in that particular direction. And gradually, as you go on taking, learning with more and more samples, it finally reaches a point where, it is almost at a saturation level, and can say that model is saturated or results are short, and we can say that, this is the most that we can get out of it. So in this case, we are running epochs 300, which is just 300 iterations through the whole data set. So we have a data set of around 120 samples, so 120 to 300. And what we are doing is, we are just running this gradient step. In each and every epoch, we are passing the whole training set, and then we are, also passing it the real output value, and then we are calculating the loss in, after each 10 epochs. So as you can see, in epoch 1, the loss was something 1.15 and accuracy was 0.233. And as we go on, the loss keeps on decreasing, which actually means that your predicted value is coming closer to your real value. And of course, as a result, your accuracy will go on increasing. So, loss is decreasing here, and finally we get an accuracy of almost 1, which is not very good, I will say, because probably the model has, overfit it. But since this is on the test side, so I'll say maybe it's not, maybe it is good enough. So this is it. So I think this is the main idea of Theano and how we use Theano with the neural network. So actually, if you go on and write these gradients at your own and try to write that backpropagation algorithm at your own, and you'll see that writing all that chain rules, writing all those differentiations, writing or even updating your weights is a lot of hassle. And in this case, Theano does all of that for us, right? And most importantly, you can actually also run it on the GPU. So our GPU are particularly programmed for a very, matrix multiplication of a very large matrices. So in this case, as you can see, for matrices of 100 into 100, it is almost what, 10,000? And generally the matrix is even to the dimension of 1000 to 1000, which is very big. And GPU are particularly helpful in that case, and they can actually compute the multiplications or all the operations over these matrices in a much more efficient way compared to the CPU. So again, this was not the deep learning model. This was Theano and how we use Theano. And so in this particular IPython model, we'll see how we create a language model to, by using Theano, and we'll also generate the text using that language model. Okay, so in a previous slide you saw how a neural net looks like, and this is how probably a deep neural net looks like. And actually it is quite shallow. I mean, it is not actually so deep, but still. So you can see, if you go on through these connections, there are a lot of parameters in a deep neural net, and it is very hard, and it takes a lot of time to learn these parameters. It takes a lot of data. It takes a lot of computation power, and for all that purpose, we use your Python because it is way too flexible to code up these complex models. We use Theano because it provides a really optimized computation over for these deep neural nets. So again, a few links that you can go through. Coming to the recurrent neural net, right? Okay, before that, let's talk about what is language modeling. So language modeling is probably one of the oldest NLP objective, which is to predict the next word given the previous word. So you all go to Google and you type something, Google gives you some suggestions, right? So it is basically trying to find out what might be the most probable word after the words that you have already entered. So that is a language model. So earlier, models like Ngrams were used for language modeling, but I told you about what were the limitations of those models. They could not consider the long-term dependencies of the text, and they could not consider how those texts are related to each other. So mathematically, a language model is the probability of the ith word conditioned on all the previous words. Simple, right? Okay. Coming to RNN. So RNN are a very actively used deep neural networks in the field of natural language processing, and the reason is recurrent neural networks are in a way custom made for the sequential data, which is what our text is, which is what maybe our songs or a music is, maybe what people have actually created some very cool stuff over recurrent neural networks, and if you have any kind of sequential data, you can use recurrent neural network for that purpose. I was recently talking to a guy who was actually planning to use recurrent neural network with your DNA structure, because DNA structure is a sequential data, and you can actually try to predict whether this particular, the element in that DNA would be this or that. So now, why they are called recurrent neural network is because generally this is how they look. So you have the input, you have a weight parameter which is u, you have a hidden state which is s, then you loop through this state a couple of times, and then you finally return the result. Now if you unfold it, this is how it looks like. So t1, t minus 1, t plus 1 are basically the timestamps which you can consider the words in a text. So if you are right now at the fourth word, your third word will be at t minus 1 timestamp, and your next word will be at t plus 1 timestamp. Now, what this recurrent neural network will do is, it will take those words as a sequence. I mean, it will take the input of those words as a sequence, and actually most of the time these inputs are the word vectors that we just talked about earlier. And after going through an activation function similar to sigmoid function that we went through in the neural network, which is in this case is our hyperbolic tangent. It will transform the input by multiplying it with the input weight parameter, which is u. Then it will go to the hidden state, and it will have a a common weight which is w. And using w, it will finally calculate the state of the next time stamp. Also, it will output the value of the output at this current time stamp, and it will propagate in this way. So I mean, it will basically take a window of size maybe 5 or 10 or maybe the size of the whole sentence, and it will input the word vectors, will transform it accordingly, and then finally return the result. In the case of a language model, what do you think will be the input and output? So given that I have a sentence, and after each word I want to create a model which can precisely tell what will be the next word after this particular word. That's it. Okay, so consider, just take a sentence like we are considering a fixed vocabulary size here. So what I want to do is, given V, I want to find out how precisely I can tell that the next word should be R. Given R, how precisely I can tell that the next word should be considering. Given considering, how precisely I can tell the next word would be A or fixed word. But this is how the N-grams model works, right? The recurrent neural network will actually consider all the previous words, and this is what it was doing here. It is actually considering all the previous timestamps to calculate the value at the current timestamp. And it is going through the same operations at each step, and that's the reason it's called recurrent neural networks. It is doing the same type of computation at each timestamp, and it is actually utilizing what was the outputs at the previous stages.
How is it taking all the previous ones and showing the last one? Like,
This is how it is depicted here, but actually it will go.
goes on.
Yeah. So I mean, there's also a problem in there. So I'll come to that later. Right. So you can actually find out these IPython notebooks at the GitHub repository that I have added with the all of the proposal pages. So let's just go quickly through the code out here. Let's keep those three lines, the sentence start token, everything. We are considering a vocabulary size of 10,000. We might have some 40,000 or 50,000 words in the training set, but we'll only consider the 10,000 words which are found most frequently. Okay, so what is happening? I have a data set of IMDb, which is generally used for sentiment analysis, but I just used it for this language modeling purpose as well. And what we are doing here is we are just reading that data set. We are tokenizing each and every line here. Some filtering, which is basically removing the lines with where characters are lesser than the min sign character, which is 3. So if it has a single word with 2 characters, then we won't consider it. Similarly, we'll remove. We'll only consider the sentences which does not have STDP in it. And finally, we will add a sentence start token and sentence end token in that sentence. So if I have a sentence, before the first word, I'll add another unique token, and after the last word, I'll add another unique token. And I'll come to that later, why we are doing it, so which is quite initialized similar to here. And then I'm using your NLTK for tokenizing those words into sentences. So everyone knows about NLTK, right? And most of you, right? So we are just using the simple tokenizer of NLTK to tokenize the words. And finally, we are just taking the most common words out of it. and creating a data set of tokenized sentences. So it's pretty easy, right? I mean, basically what we are doing is we are considering each and every comment, we are breaking into words, and then we are doing some cleaning, and then we are considering only the words which are found most frequently. For rest of the word we'll, as you can see here, we'll just input something like an unknown token for that word, because we don't want to increase the size of our weight parameters, which is already 10,000 here. And I mean, model this big won't probably run on this particular laptop, I'll say. So in this particular step, what I'm doing is, so again, if you're talking about words, we should have some way to identify them uniquely. So this is basically just creating a dictionary of each and every word, and which is basically giving a unique index to each and every word. So if da is there, or maybe ball is there, then we'll say, the index of da is 3 or 8, something like that. So it is just to uniquely identify those words. So we are just taking an example, output and input. So your one sentence will look something like this. And this is a unique word, this is another unique word. And this is your output. Now, as you can see, the output at the first position is basically the word at the second position. And it goes on like this. The output at the second position is basically the word at the third position. And this is what language model is about, right? Predicting the next word given the previous word. Okay, so some parameter initialization here. So our word dimensions are basically equal to the vocabulary size. Our hidden dimension is 100. And there's something called BPTT trim, which we'll talk about later. So so BPTT is basically called back propagation through time, which is actually quite equivalent to your back propagation. Instead of just going through it once it calculates the gradients at particular timestamp, it will transfer those gradients to the previous timestamp as well, then to the previous, and then to the previous timestamp. So I mean, this is just a fancy name for back propagation only, and I have trimmed it at 5 because for now I don't want it to propagate the errors till the fifth previous timestamp. And then I am randomly initializing your parameters of the model, which is quite similar to the initialization of those weight parameters in the previous IPython notebook. Okay, so in this particular network, we have 3 weights which we have to learn. One is U, which is your input weights. Second is W, which is your basically transfer weight between states. And another is V, which is the weight for your output. Okay, then similarly, we are creating some symbolic expressions for the input and output, which is X and Y. And then we are going through our forward propagation step. Now the forward propagation step in a recurrent neural network is a bit different from the forward propagation step of usual neural network. So here we are actually using, first of all, we are using a hyperbolic tangent function here because it is, most of the time it trains, relatively in a faster way, and also it is quite easy to find the gradients of tanh, and this is actually quite true with all the activation functions. So we talk about sigmoid or tanh. So now how we calculate the value of the hidden state, that is st or st-1 or st plus 1, multiply the input vector, which might be your word vector, by your input matrix, input weight matrix, and we also add the weight of transfer weight from the last timestamp with it. So it is actually considering the information from the previous timestamps, and it is actually propagating that information to the next timestamps as well. And finally, we have the output, which should ideally be the next word in the the sentence, but it will actually give us again a vector similar to the vector that we saw in the last IPython notebook. So it will be a vector of size equal to the vocabulary. So if we have 10,000 words, it will try to assign a probability to each word, and the word with the highest probability will be the word that we want to actually predict, right? You get this, right?
Can you just repeat this, the last one, this one?
This one?
Yeah. What are they essentially doing? Like this is like the unfolding part?
No, not actually. I mean, the unfolding part is actually this. What you're doing is you're actually, in this part you're actually considering all the previous timestamps as well, right? In this final part, you're actually getting the value of OT, which is your output, which will be a vector of size similar to the vocabulary size, which is 10,000, right? So you'll assign a probability to each of those elements, and basically that vector, each index of that vector is basically a word, right? And so it will try to predict that particular word.
So this is not BPPP, right?
This is not BPPP.
This is like a what is it exactly?
Actually, we haven't. This is forward propagation.
Forward.
This is not back propagation.
Okay.
So BPD is back propagation, right? So to code it up, I mean, as you can see, this is quite similar to the equation that we just saw. So we are just multiplying your RU with the XT, which is your input, and the weight with the previous, the value of the previous state, and then finally we are getting YT, which is actually like your OT in the equation, using the softmax of Theano softmax. And finally, it is returning us basically the first index of YT, because the way it is calculated, it actually becomes a list of lists with only one element at the first position. So, okay, so coming to one more important concept about Theano, which is called scan. So Theano doesn't actually have any for loops as such. So if you want to write a symbolic expression, and if you have something to calculate which you have to go through in it, I mean by iterating over a list or something, you can't just do it directly in Theano by just writing the Python code. So Theano has actually provided a separate function for that purpose, which is called scan. And what it will do is it will take a function which it will call on each input parameter. So I'll just go through each and every argument in this function. So forward propagation is the function which will be called on each element of the sequence. Our sequence is X, which is our input. So it will take the each sample from the input and will pass it through the forward propagation. And what forward propagation will do is it will calculate the value of that YT and OT. Your outputs info actually accumulate the results from the previous scan output to the next one. So for example, if you are trying to find out the power of maybe 2, and you have to find out the power up to 16. So you have to go on calculating 2 into 2 into 2 into 2, right? So in that case, outputs info will be 1 initially. So that is basically how we initialize things while going through the simple for loops. Then we have non-sequences. Non-sequence is something which is passed to forward propagation, which is the function that is given there as it is without going through it. So actually we are iterating over the sequences. We are only iterating over the sequences, but we are also passing the value of u, v, and w in forward propagation function, right? And then comes your truncate gradient. So truncate gradient will basically truncate the gradient propagation up to that particular timestamp. And so initially, we just set it to 5, so it won't go. It won't propagate the errors beyond previous 5 states. Entropy, the quite familiar thing, which is finding out the index with the highest probability, and then your cross entropy error, which will give you the loss with between the predicted value and the real value. Again, quite familiar thing, which is basically the gradients of your parameters and some Theano functions to calculate the forward propagation, predict the output, given an input, to find out the error, and to get the value of the back propagation through time, which is basically a list of the gradients of your 3 parameters. And finally, again, your very basic gradient descent, but although this is stochastic gradient descent because it is considering each sample at a time and not the whole bunch of training set.
how do you decide between ascent and descent?
In what?
How do you decide whether to do stochastic gradient descent or ascent?
Okay. Okay, gradient, there is no such thing as gradient ascent,
Plus,
but
with the plus sign over there is a gradient descent.
right. I mean, gradient, now, the reason it is called gradient descent is because you want to eventually decrease the error, right? So if you have some value,
Okay, I got it.
right?
To decrease the error, not increase.
Right.
not-
So actually the difference is between gradient descent and stochastic gradient descent. So in gradient descent you consider a whole bunch or a batch of the samples. In stochastic gradient descent you generally consider a single, sample and just find out the result out of it. And finally we are training it, and which is basically passing your input. So as you can see here, I'm not passing the whole matrix of the input. I'm just passing a single sample of input of your input and output, and so there were some 53 sentences in here, and so yeah. So I have actually already pre-trained it. So it is, I guess it is pre-trained already, right? Yeah. So what we'll do now is we have created these 3 helper functions which will print some random numbers, but those random numbers will have a very high probability of coming after the previous number, right? So so we have this function called generate sentences, which will take how many sentences you have to generate, and yeah. So and then it will finally pass. I will just come to the generate sentence function. So what we're doing here is, yeah. So for the first token, we are considering sentence start token. So initially we'll give the input, which is the sentence start token, and we'll say now just find out whatever word you want to find out after this, right? So after calling generate sentences, this is what we get. I mean, we are trying to generate some 50 sentences, and so given the language model that we had is saying something like Hoping classified lead the superpowers with her, right? I mean, it doesn't actually makes a lot of sense, but a lot of time you'll say that it is considering very important dependencies, right? For example, you can see that almost all of the sentences are, ends with a dot, which is something that it has learned that most of the time after masked it found a dot, or after seeing it found a dot. Similarly, if you can see here, I mean, this is probably the most interesting thing in this whole result. So as you can see, one less than sign, then your BR, then your slash, then again your greater than sign. These are all different words, but still this RNN model has learned it that if I open, this is a break line in HTML. So it has learned that if I open a break line, I have to close it. If I open a break line, a slash has to come after it. So I mean, now think about it in the sense of if you could train a model which could go on for a lot of previous timestamps, right? So actually people have created some very good projects about it. So there is a resource about generating the Python code from RNN. So in that particular thing, what he's doing is he's just as we have passed the comments from IMDb, the guy has actually passed the Python code in the RNN, and instead of words, he considered each and every characters. And after training the model on a huge data set of Python codes, he can he actually created a model which, and if you look at the result of that output, you'll see that it actually makes sense somehow. I mean, the braces, all the curly braces are opening and closing very perfectly, and this was in the case of C, or all the indentations are popular. And a few people have also used it to generate music. So they actually pass maybe after doing some signal processing and some aesthetical acoustic features of the music, they pass those features to the RNN because it works very well with the sequential data, and they were actually able to train this RNN to create music. So again, okay, so there are some fun projects that this guy has done. One of which is training the model over some very eminent writers in the past. So it has created after training the model for of course a few hours on a very powerful machine, when he finally got the output of that model, this is what it looks like. And if we have adequate amount of data set, if you have adequate amount of data for a particular model, and you can just pass it to the RNN, then it will actually give you some really good results like this. I mean, for our data set, there were very few samples only, like only 50,000, and it will actually require maybe 1 million or 2, right? So similarly, yeah, take this example. So you might have also contributed to Wikipedia, and you have to write articles or in a particular syntax, and as you can see, it completely understands that if it is opening a bracket, right, it has to close it. If it is writing some special characters, then it has to close it accordingly. Okay, one more. Mathematical theorems. So he trained the RNN model over mathematical theorems, and this is what the output looks like. And if you actually read it, it won't actually makes a lot of sense, but it actually still looks plausible enough, right? And here, your Linux source code. So you train a model on a Linux source code of around 474 MB of C code, which is actually a lot. And this is how the output of RNN looks like. So you can see it is properly, opening the curly braces and properly ending them up, or putting your semicolons after the sentence and everything. Opening braces or assigning anything. So the power of RNN is in the sequential data that you can provide it, and it will require a lot of data, and for that purpose, Wikipedia is quite useful because you can freely download the dataset from it, and although you require maybe a bit more computation power, so if you can get your hand on a GPU, a machine with a GPU, then go with it. And Theano has inbuilt support for GPU. So by just changing your main computation machine to GPU, you can just train RNN model like we showed. So this is it, I guess. I mean, if you have any questions about it, then. Oops.
Something, how do they do text summarization? Is it something similar?
Actually, even I haven't tried it as for now, but I think it can be done using your. So actually, this is text summarization in a way, if you can see it, right? I mean, if you have a text about maybe a particular person, if you have some 200 or 300 articles about it, and finally, and you actually create a language model over it. Of course, you'll have to train a language model over a very large data set. But if you can somehow skew those words for that particular article, then maybe you can summarize it. That's the way to go about it. How is it?
So I have two questions for you. One is your usual topic models where you talked about the technique of LDA. How? So how would you use a deep learning network in that situation? One, and second, as you correctly pointed out, that any deep learning framework that I use requires a lot of data to train.
Right.
And ironically, one of the largest pain points in any NLP application, as far as commercial users go, you have very little training data.
Right.
And if you have to create training data, it's very expensive. Your usual data sets like IMDb or Yelp data don't really cut it when it comes to commercial production level applications. So what would you suggest in that point? Because one, I need to create an accurate model, and the incremental accuracy jump vis-a-vis a statistical model versus a pure deep learning model is somewhere around 5%, the incremental accuracy. And I don't have the data. That's my second problem. So how would you approach these two problems as far as creating a topic model goes?
Okay. So actually, the idea model is a kind of unsupervised model. So right, if you have to go about creating a similar topic modeling model for with deep learning, then I think this is something that we are trying to do actually at Neuron.
Yeah, sure. So I have been through the same situation. In fact, my only role in the company is to make the training data. So I know how tough that could be. But there are ways around it. Not so popular way is Bayesian networks, which uses much less data compared to a statistical network.
But that's a baseline approach.
Yeah. But Bayesian is similar to a neural network. It just uses probability instead of this.
No, that's understood. So what I'm basically saying is,
You want to do it without, what do you say, much of a
I
training
can
data, right?
so I can get into I would start off with naive Bayes. I would then go into SVMs. I would then go into logic regression, so on and so forth. And for even better accuracy, I might create an ensemble. But my simple question is, if I were to try to create a topic model, because that's one of the largest problems of any NLP-based commercial application goes. Then I really can't use deep learning for any commercial application that involves topic modeling.
You can, and that is what is used. But nowadays, later research, have you heard of reinforcement learning?
Correct.
Yeah. So reinforcement learning is basically, there are two types of reinforcement learning: on-site learning, off-site learning. So off-site learning, basically, on-site learning means you drop. It's like a crazy child. You drop it in a maze, it'll keep running and banging through walls. Okay. The off-site is, it's like it has seen a crazy child running around, so it will have some sense कि नहीं यार मेरे को दीवार पे नहीं जाके टकराना. So that is the off-site learning. Now when you use your RNNs and all for language models, they will restrict it because they don't have the feature of exploration. Now a simple thing like a Q learner, which is an off-site learner, if you use it on RNN as a layer for exploration, it's actually the Baidu, Google, IBM's research, ongoing research. In fact, if you have heard of Deep Dive, so Google
They
has
have access to
petabytes of
immense
data.
amounts of data, petabytes of data, which
Yeah, so
startups like us don't have access
no,
to.
actually you do, because have you heard of PLOC? PLOC, PLOS. PLOS is Public Library of Science.
Okay.
उसके पास कुछ 70 GB का डेटा है टेक्स्ट फाइल. Wikipedia dump, if you unzip you get 60 TB. UNBC data open source, if you unzip it's almost 90 GB. So if you need huge data, then buy a few hard disk, मोटी वाली, black वाली. There's a Yahoo का 14 terabyte का data. If you could store it. Now I think 14 terabyte of data is Yahoo की जिंदगी में जितना उसने किया काम उतना. 14 terabyte is huge. But I have made the training set. So I used UNBC data, I used PLOS data, I used Wikipedia data, and frankly that is more than enough for now.
Okay, understood. Now the second question is, so you talked about word to vec. So what other applications apart from NLP do you see? Means because in a way it's a philosophy. Word to vec is a philosophy. So which other applications which may or may not be NLP based do you see Word2Vec can use?
So if you I mean talk about in the sense of computer vision as well, right? So I think I don't think that anyone has used it in computer vision as for now, because I don't know for some reasons, but I mean if you have a few images of maybe a tree in the sky, it might be possible, right? That you're taking an image and there's a tree and in the background there's a sky. So in that case, and if you train that model, and finally you give maybe an edge of that tree, and you want to create further image out of it. So given the trained model that you already have, you can say that probably because in most of the images the sky is I mean in the north direction or the top, and most of the trees in this direction. So if I I mean create my vector which is a positive vector going in this direction, that it should show an image which might be of blue color. If I go in this direction, that it should show an image show an image which might be of the color same to the the tree. I mean this is a very vague idea, but the applications might be a lot, as you said, because it's more of a philosophy and idea, right? It depends how we can use it. But
also, I'll just add on to what he said. See, Word2Vec boils down to a neural network, right? Now, what is a Word2Vec? It is a specially tuned neural network to work according to your text. Now, your say, I don't know, एक सेंसर होता है जो डेटा दे जा रहा है. Imagine there's a sensor और लैपटॉप पे ना सेंसर होता है हमारा, जो थर्मोमीटर हमारा बताता है स्टैट्स, उसका डेटा लगातार आता जा रहा है. नाउ इवन दैट कुड बी अ डेटा कुछ भी हो, उससे फर्क नहीं पड़ता. द पॉइंट इज फाइनल थिंग बॉइल्स डाउन टू न्यूरल नेटवर्क. अगर मेरा डेटा का मेरे को पता है कि वर्ड्स कैसे की, मेरे को पता है कि लेंथ नॉर्मली 7 की होती है, तो डिपेंडेंसी 5 इज मोर देन एनफ. पर कोई अगर मेरे पास ऐसा डेटा आ रहा है जिसके अंदर लेंथ 1000 की है, तो आई ट्यून इट अकॉर्डिंग टू दैट. So, of course, what you're saying, does Word2Vec has any other application? I'm just saying it's basically a neural network which is tuned for it. Neural network itself has a lot of it. And for those who wanted to know Word2Vec and this, so I have trained 2 models. Mod 2 is your Word2Vec, and second one is LDA. So I entered Ronaldo. And the most similar ones are Messi, Neymar, Cristiano. Now these might not even share a single line with each other, but the semantic meaning is similar. The LDA one is basically clustering. So you can see here, the first cluster I have printed is Japan, Japanese Tokyo, Osaka, Suzuki, etc., etc. Now these clusters, as you know, they belong to a same category. So that's what LDA does, and that is what Word2Vec does.
So what is the data set behind Mod2?
Both of them Wikipedia.
The numbers are probabilities or similarity index?
Yeah, similarity index.
so any other question? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Stuff, why are we here? Okay, so Instagram, as my talk suggests, is something related to pictures. Pictures nowadays is, we can say, a very hot topic in terms of research, because data analytics have started moving towards images. We have seen many startups coming up in the field of image processing. Like, every one of you here have heard of Magicpin, right? So it's a startup based out in Gurgaon, Magicpin, who give you cashback for the bills that you upload over their app. Okay, now I was hearing one talk about a startup called Endorse.com. It is a US-based startup. Magicpin actually copied the concept over from there. It was a talk from PyCon 2014. Now that talk suggested one concept that's called image unhighlighting. Now that was something really new. I dig into it a bit more, and what I got to know was that image processing has become so integral in terms of software pipelines nowadays, because unhighlighting was something really interesting. Like people who were uploading their bills over the app, people who were actually uploading the bills over the app were actually highlighting their bill details with a pen so that it would be easier for the company to remit the. Sorry to butt in between, but it's tea time. I'm sorry. Yeah, your talk got rescheduled. I'm so sorry, guys. Tea is ready right outside. We'll be resuming this talk afterwards. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
I'll talk to you about that later.
And I'm very sorry to the speaker of this talk, Duhara. I'm very sorry. You may continue. Okay, now so continuing back from where I left, I was talking about image pre-processing. Okay, image pre-processing today is an integral part of every image processing pipeline that you may encounter in your life. I give you an example of an app called Magic Pen. When you upload your bills over the app, there is not a team sitting over there who is manually seeing that what amount of bill you actually purchased, what was the tax paid, what was the items on which it has to be given away. It is actually done in an automated manner into an image processing pipeline. And there are a certain number of steps involved in it. We are not going to get into those deep details. What we are going to deal is basically one-on-one kind of a basic steps of what image processing is actually about. And to learn that, the best thing that I could have experienced in my life was making filters on my own, because it actually gave you some kind of a traction about what actually these functions are doing at the back end. So I did this, and I'll now talk about this, what I'm going to deal with. I'm going to talk a bit about pictures, I'm going to talk a bit about processing. Certain concepts which are involved, the tools that could be used, and maybe a demo if I'm left with some time. So this slide is the backbone of my presentation. Now it says my vision, computer vision. You see, it's a character, alphabetic character A. Now on the left hand side, you can see that you can easily identify it as an A, but the computer doesn't interpret the image as we do. Okay, so how the computer interprets the image is, it actually slices the image into blocks, and then it assigns the values to each block based on some interpolation algorithms, and the value which is fed to the box is the thing that the computer matters. Okay. Okay, a theory. Every image on a computer machine is sampled and quantized. Now these two words are in technical terms the basis of digital image processing, sampling and quantization of an image. Sampling is dividing an image into a pixel. You have a beautiful image with you. When the image is, say, a real image like this wall I'm seeing, its image is being created onto my mind, it's an analog image. But when you try to store it onto a computer, the computer does not process this data into an analog form in any kind. What it does is, it takes the image, now as per the resolution. If you want a high resolution image, it would take small slices. If you need a low resolution image, it would take bigger slices. But all it would be is a grid. Now supposedly, I take this wall and divide it into a 7x4 grid. Now, each grid has a different kind of values associated with it. Say the black is 0, white is 255, and the grey shades lie within it. So, how could we interpret that, what actually the value of that grid is going to be? These things are dependent on certain algorithms that which value should be assigned to it. We have nearest neighbor interpolation, univariate spline, and various other kinds of algorithms. Like here, if I had written on a piece of paper A with my hand, it would have been really very smooth. But when I sampled and quantized the image, what I get is something like this. There is a darker region within, and at the edges there are some grey tones. If you take an image and zoom it into as much as possible, you will actually see that at the bottom line, the image is actually a grid. And the computer vision actually what it does is, it doesn't care what the color is, it has a numerical value associated with it, it would work upon that. Okay, so this is the summary of what I said. Every pixel representation is denoted by a set of numbers. Now I say set because it's not necessary that a block is represented by a single number. If you take a colored image is basically represented by 3 channels, which we popularly known as RGB, the red, green, blue parameters. web developers might be very well aware of this fact. Okay, and in Python OpenCV, the best advantage of doing image processing is that every image is a NumPy array. The advantage is that NumPy arrays are very fast computation we are able to achieve using NumPy arrays. And now we have an image, we need to process it. What we do is we basically play around with the numbers based on our intentions, our target, our whatever we. Supposedly I have an image and I want to convert it into a black and white image, or say I want to give it a green tint, or I want to just increase the brightness, or I want to convert the colors, whatever I want to do. It is basically a manipulation of numbers of that specified array. But yeah, one thing, be cautious while playing with the numbers, because the numbers actually wrap around with each other, and supposedly you are defining a NumPy array with int 8 data type. So after 256, it doesn't switches to 257, it wraps back to 0, and if you are not cautious enough while doing it, you could end up in some bizarre images maybe. Okay, the tools at disposal which you tend to use these days for your basic image processing, I would say for making a Facebook DP, are listed over here: PixArt, Instagram, GIMP. Okay, some few of the logos I even forgot the name of. There are so many tools out there. So, okay, sorry. So the basic question, and I said that why are we even bothered of doing all this stuff when already so many tools are at our disposal? The basic answer is that computer vision itself is a very huge and a versatile domain to play with. And if you want to step into it, you actually need to know image processing algorithms and concepts. And this basic exercise is something you actually have fun while doing it. You actually see the results in a manner that you can compare it with some quality commercial products, and you get to know about the concepts really well. So, I'll see, if you're not willing to use any of these tools, you can actually go ahead and make your own filter. And what actually you require is Python, OpenCV, and some amount of enthusiasm and interest. Okay, many of you might not be using OpenCV, and there are other tools like SimpleCV, Pillow, PIL, and a mobile application framework called Kiwi. These frameworks have some image processing tools built into it, and you can actually make use of those as well. The bottom line is that you need to know the functions and the mathematics behind the image very well. Tools could be anyone. You can go and create your own framework if you wish. Okay, two basic operations which every image processing book, be it a 10-page book or a 1000-page book, would discuss is grayscaling and thresholding. So let's see what it actually is. Okay, that's me in a party. I look a bit good over there because I gave some effort. So now this was a color image which I used, and I converted it to a grayscale and a negative. These are two really basic operations. You can find it into any image processing app that you might be using. Instagram, PixArt, or whatever. I really don't use those. I'm not an avid photographer. So let's see what actually I did. So this is the code segment that I used. CV2 is the OpenCV library. It's import CV2 as CV or whatever you want to do like. CV2.imrit actually reads the image from the hard drive. You can give a URL over here so that it's possible that you might be scraping images over the web. So you could actually create a pipeline that is scraping the web, and at the same time you're feeding it to the OpenCV. So imrit can actually take URL paths. It needs some subtle changes with that. Okay, now converting to some other color format in OpenCV is as simple as CVT color. Give the image that you want to convert and give the color code that you want to convert. BGR is the standard format in which every OpenCV image is depicted, and BGR to gray simply converts a BGR channel to a single pixel gray channel. And for the negative, all I did is 255 minus the image. 255 is the upper cap of a grayscale image. Every grayscale is represented as a 0 to 255, and when you subtract it, a white becomes a black becomes a white, and the intermediate things flip with them, like 0 becomes 255, 1 becomes 254, 2 becomes 256, and so on. And this is the results that you are actually able to fetch. So 2 lines of code and you are able to get a grayscale image and a negative with just 2 lines of code. Okay. Thresholding is a very important concept into image processing because most of the pre-processing works actually roam around thresholding in one way or the other. Okay, the first image which you see is the original image is actually a gradient image. This is actually what the 0 to 255 scales means. The left side of the image is a black, which is a, what I did is it's a 256 cross 256 pixel box. And every column is assigned its own value. So all the zeros column has 0, 1, 2, 3, and the last one is 255. So you can actually have a look at which color tone is what in terms of grayscale. So when you threshold an image, threshold operation is really simple in terms of its basic concept. You take a value, you decide a threshold. Everyone here is familiar with step function in mathematics? So step function, in a step function, the same way what you do is you set a pixel value, say 80. Now every pixel below 80 would be given assigned a value of 0, and every pixel above 80 would be assigned a value of 255. So it's like estimating a picture. So like I have here taken a threshold at 127 and my image is divided into half. I can actually invert the operations and see that the lower one gets a white value, the upper value, and the upper one gets a lower value, so we get an inversion. Similarly, these two are other truncation operations that I have used to depict, and all of this could be done with a single line of code in OpenCV. The 5 lines in the middle of the code, CV2 is the threshold image, 127 is the threshold value that I have taken, 127 in the extreme middle, 255 is the upper cap, and beyond it is the flag that actually tells that what kind of a thresholding operation has to be done. Okay, now this was quite a boring stuff. Why actually am I doing it? What happens if I am thresholding an image in an actual sense? That's where I recommend an exercise that includes making filters. Now this was my same image that I depicted 2 slides back, and now after applying the same filter operations, you can actually see what actually each of these threshold operations is doing to your image. My original image, and just below that you can actually see that if I run a trunk operation, it is basically increasing the brightness of my image. Similarly, the other 4 filters, the other 4 threshold operations are actually giving me some other kind of effects. And